Great to be here with you this afternoon. This is what we want to cover today. I'm going to jump into the export report, just give a few key points that's coming through from the last set of numbers that we published a little while ago. And then we'll jump into the export and regional wine support package, a bit of a tag team here with Stu. And, but before doing so, I just want to take the opportunity just to thank you for all being here. From a personal perspective, you know, I'm deeply grateful for the partnership we have with everyone in the room. I look around, there's many friends here. Our role is to help you guys be successful, to provide a platform, whether it's through the global marketing activities, through the data and insights we can provide, through putting on events such as this, and also all the material we send out, through the regulatory services we provide. I mean, you can't get wine out of the country without coming through us. You need a license, you need certificates, you need insights as to make sure you're compliant with overseas requirements. And everything we do, we're here to provide that critical service. I like to think we get it right most of the time. Undoubtedly, there's things we can do better, but I know amongst friends, and I know looking across this cohort, I can always rely on you to give us robust feedback to make sure we improve. And look, I just want to continue that, you know, that relationship. It's working really well, and onwards and upwards, and we'll talk about that through the export numbers as well. So we released the last set of numbers, and clearly whenever we talk about the export numbers, they tell some of the story, they don't tell the complete story. We're always talking about what's getting on a ship, and we've always got to look at what's happening in market as well. There's some markets where we have greater granular information on what's happening, you know, the US in particular, the UK. We can't mirror that in China readily, but the export stats do tell a very positive story, and that matches up with everything anecdotally that I'm hearing around the traps. Obviously, I'm on the road a lot, talking with you guys out into regions. It's never uniform. Everyone's got a different brand proposition. Everyone's in different markets. Everyone's, you know, got a different business that they run. But across the board, I look at where we're sitting, and we're in much more positive space than we have been for many years. You cast your mind back to the last 10 years, you know, we had 6 years of negative value growth. The last 4 years have been positive. 1%, 8%, 10%, and now 13% to the 30 September figures. So we're undoubtedly in a very positive place at the moment. But that means, of course, there's so much more work to be done. You know, we heard some of the numbers around what's happening in the US at the moment. Clearly that paints a picture of a lot of challenges, and we've got a lot of work collectively to do there. Clearly we look at the numbers in China, and you know, they're off the chart. You know, cast back 10 years ago, exports were, you know, $25 million to China. And just to the mainland alone, it's well over $700 million now. And it's going to hit $1 billion, you know, before we know it, based on these current rates of growth. I'll jump into some of the other markets shortly in a little bit of detail. We are seeing that strong growth across those upper price points. Undoubtedly, we've got a very sharp and refined focus on our premium wine offering, because that's where we collectively have under-indexed in some of our key markets, and we need to bring that sharper focus to it because we need to grab a greater share of that marketplace. But everything we do is for the whole category. Every export, every country has a presence across all the price points, and they all need to be successful to deliver returns and growth to all those regional communities that sit across the country. So up here, we've got all the price points, and as you can see, the total increment is, you know, just under $300 million, the uplift in the last 12 months. And that's really across the board. We have had that stronger growth at those upper price points, which is very welcome, and it's what I talked about just before. But we are seeing strong value increments at those lower price points as well. And that will play through to a lot of the commercial sector and a lot of the inland regions, and we need them to continue to prosper in the long term. Overall, we're seeing uplift in terms of those average prices, higher since 2009, so a lot of the metrics are positive. We're seeing a greater number of exporters into the export market, up over 2,100 exporters now actively in the market, compared to just under 1,800 in 12 months ago. So there's more people getting active that's principally a China story, and I'll get onto that shortly. So I talked about the China figures. That graph speaks for itself in terms of those value increments over the last 5 years. Exports have trebled in those last 5 years. There's a few myths around China. Some think it's just a Treasury wine estate story, and obviously Treasury have been very public in terms of their public pronouncements to the stock exchange, and clearly on the market at the moment, their share price is going particularly well. Many people would have been keen to take them at the demerger because they would have seen a nice lift in their super. But it's not just a Treasury story. They're certainly undoubtedly strong there. But you look in terms of the concentration in that market versus the US, for example, the top 10 exporters to that market are doing well and performing strongly. But they account for just over $400 million of the total value that's going there. So that's around a half of the market. So I guess the key point is the export growth there is deep and it's across the board, and a lot of people are enjoying success there. Clearly, the free trade agreement has been a critical component of that, and not so much of the tariff reduction itself. Clearly, that helps, and we'll be going to a zero tariff in 2019. But I think to Owen's point before, had a real head-turning effect. It demonstrated a long commitment between the two countries, a long-term partnership in terms of the two countries working together, and that plays particularly well in a market like China, and it resonates strongly. And so we've seen the impact flowing through from that. The other point is, as we all know, red wine dominates in that market, and features very strongly in the growth story. The white wine story, personally, I think is going to have a long way to go. I think in the long term, as that market evolves, the education evolves, and the understanding around what a white wine has to offer, there is growth at the moment off a small base, and I'm supremely confident that will continue to grow in the long term. The US is undoubtedly a hard market. We've heard that at length this morning, so I don't need to repeat any of that. The numbers, there are some positive spots, but we can't just gild the lily, so to speak, and just say everything's rosy there. We know how tough it is in that market. We're working particularly hard, obviously, with all our in-market activities, with Aaron leading them, to try and consistently shift the dial. And there'll be great opportunities ahead with the additional funding, which we'll touch on shortly, to help accelerate that growth over the next few years. There are some strong points in terms of some of the upper price points. Exports at $10 per litre are up 11%. Again, this is shipment data. We've got to look at what's happening in depletions to come off the back of that. One of the key metrics there is we've only got about 250 companies active in the US. There was a comment earlier in the day about the US, you've got to be prepared to invest in that US opportunity, and that takes a lot of money. When we're at the heyday, hitting about $1 billion, in 2007 or thereabouts, we had double the number of exporters who were active in that market. So from my perspective, the key to success there is pushing the big exporters to continue to get traction, to drive a lot of the volume growth with value that's needed in that market, but also to bring more exporters into the market to get that diversity of offering to help spread the message around what Australian wine has to offer. Canada is a market as well, which we've had some challenges in. One of the really important things I want to leave everyone with a message today is, and through the Export and Regional Wine Support Package, there'll be a lot of talk about the US and China. We've already talked a lot about the US and China today, but they're not the only keys to our success. It's a whole range of markets which are critically important. Canada is obviously one of them. One of the opportunities we've got ahead with this additional funding is that we can release some of the underlying funding that we have through the levy stream and direct that to some of these other important markets, such as Canada and such as the UK as well, to support what are both very traditional, loyal and critical markets to our success. Talked about the UK. Laura and the team are doing an outstanding job there amongst some pretty severe headwinds that have come through the last 12 to 18 months. Obviously, Brexit, Exchange rate impacts immediately have caused a lot of damage at the commercial end. People were trying to take some volume increases, take some margin and had to sacrifice volume off the back of that. And we've seen that suffer at the commercial end. We are seeing some growth at some of the upper price points there. And that's, again, off a small base, that is welcome. But it's a critical market. It's our #1 market by volume still. If that volume didn't find a home in the UK, we'd have to it wouldn't be that easy to find a home elsewhere. So it continues to be an important part of the mix. It will continue to be very well funded through our underlying funding stream, and we need to continue to focus on it. So I want to briefly mention, as I said, we export to over 120 countries. There's some real bright spots in parts of Europe, Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium. There's bright spots in some emerging markets, and we're looking to put together a program of activities towards the end of this financial year in those emerging markets. We want to test your appetite to come with us to explore some of the opportunities that sit in that part of the world, put together a suite of activities and see if there is appetite in the market to take them up. And Hero will be leading the charge on that over the next few months. So I'm going to turn now to the export and regional wine support package. So I was up here last year and I was saying how if you send me a LinkedIn request, you don't get up in the queue to get a check from us. 12 months on, I've cancelled my LinkedIn account because it was just getting out of control. There's 4 key programs through the package, and just going back a step, this money is closely linked to all the wet rebate reforms that the government's implemented off the back of industry agreement around where those changes needed to land. That's a completely separate issue, and I don't jump into that one. It's the policy issues that the industry has been at the forefront of discussing with government. But the minister's clarion call to this sector was coming together on those reforms. There is a pot of money that will be available to help drive exports and help drive tourism opportunities. And so she's done a very good job at pulling that all together and delivering this package of funds to the industry, which is a very rare opportunity for us. And we're, it's a great challenge we've collectively got ahead, and we need to deliver on it, obviously. So there's 4 key programs that are mapped out in the package. The first one is international marketing, driving export growth in those two key growth opportunities, which sit in China and the US. And Stuart will talk to that in detail shortly. There's a capability development program. I'm not going to talk at any length about that today, but the idea behind that is developing a suite of tools, an assistance package to help continue to guide exporters and tourism operators to navigate the challenges that principally sit out of the China market, but also other markets as well. And so we'll continue to develop a suite of tools that will come through that program. The grants program, I'll talk some detail about that at the end of this presentation. And there's a small cider program, and I'm not going to say anything more about it to this audience. I don't think there's many cider producers here, but that was clearly cider as part of the wet regime, so there needed to be some benefits delivered to the cider sector. So with that, I'm going to hand to Stu to lead off and talk about Program 1, the China and US campaigns.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Stuart Barclay. I'm the GM of Marketing for Wine Australia. I've got the complicated slide, and I will try and take you through it. But really, whilst this is all about Program 1, we actually have to think about this strategy as a global strategy. So you can actually take USA and China off this particular slide, although this was developed for this particular program. Over the last 12 months, we've been working on what is the real strategy for the $32.5 million spend. And really, it's the development of our existing strategy, but it's much more than that. This gives us a real opportunity to supercharge what we want to do globally with a key focus on China and the US. So our global vision is pretty simple. We want to increase the perception of and the demand for Australian wine and wine tourism among the consumers and wine trade in China and the USA. I say, take China and USA off. This is actually a global strategy. We've actually got to start thinking about this as part of a broader global approach this just allows us to supercharge those two particular markets, which will have a knock-on effect around the world. So as part of that, there's three key imperatives. Firstly, there's grow the penetration of premium Australian wines in China through increased availability and by raising consumer awareness and usage. So that's about just promoting Australian, promoting that usage to the Chinese consumer, telling them how to sell our products, how to drink our products. The second one is to influence and motivate the wine distribution in the US network, or the US distribution network, to really get behind the Australian premium wine category and really support it. And the third one, which is historically a little bit different, but we've been talking about it for quite a while now, is to leverage and grow the international tourism to really create that extra international demand to build that awareness around the premium Australian wine category. So three simple imperatives. Now that's really, there's four real key objectives that really sit beneath that. One, we really need to reset and refocus. What does Australian premium wine really mean? How we drive that desire, credibility, and awareness. And that's a global piece. How do we create that real positive sentiment, that interest, that excitement around, again, the premium Australian wine category in the US to build availability and that reach? The third one is to fuel ongoing growth in China by furthering that trade and consumer knowledge. And the final one, again, it's aligning the investment that is already in the market that you're already investing around. So how can we take that investment that you've already put into the market, and how do we really drive that to leverage off and grow excitement? Coming out of that, there's really three key strategic pillars. One is education, so building awareness of what Australia is all about. Is how we engage with key influencers, how we really drive the gatekeeper engagement around the world, in China, the USA in particular, and again, international wine tourism. How can we drive that message that Australia is exciting, it's innovative, it's creative, and get more people into this market? And then coming out the back of that, there's initiatives. These initiatives are all around education, education, education. How do we build tool sets? How do we build libraries that you can take into the markets and use yourself? How do we create tool sets that really talk about the regionality? How we create tool sets that talk to the educators? But it's also about the distributors. How we can create tool sets for retailers to understand what Australia is all about. How we can work with media, and finally, how we can work and drive the consumer to actually understand what Australia means. Now that really means an expansion of that global gatekeeper engagement to drive that desire, credibility, and awareness of premium Australian wine. And that is by leveraging and growing and developing our key events. That's by bringing more people to Australia. That's if we can't get people to Australia, then we will build extra activity in overseas markets. We will go to those markets and take Australia and really drive it in terms of working the markets much harder. And then there's finally, it's co-investing with Tourism Australia on a much bigger scale than we've ever done before. It's working with them on projects that really set the scene for what Australia actually is. Now that means that we are currently working on some refocused, critical key messages around what Australian wine is. That means we are investing heavily in media investment going forward, and that's print, broadcast, and much more significantly in digital. And the final one is, yes, we've got key events around the world, but it's actually taking those key events and making them much bigger and much more impactful, and taking many, many more winemakers back into different markets, be that the USA, be that China, or other markets globally. So this isn't necessarily a reset, this is just a nuance of what we have been doing over the last few years. But what is different about it is this year, for the next 3 years, we have an additional $11 million to help us get there. This is what the current budget for this remaining financial year looks like. So we have an additional $10.7 million that is split between China and the USA. One of the critical events that we have got coming up is we are country of honour for Vinexpo Hong Kong in May. Now that will be a significant investment for Australia. Currently, we have over 130 individual wine companies who want to participate in that particular campaign. It will be the largest Wine Australia activity in probably over a decade. There's a huge amount of complexity in there, and it will be critical in setting the scene for China for the next few years for us. But it allows us to take a lot of winemakers and a lot of wineries, a lot of brands into that market. Key messaging. As I mentioned, key messages need to be nuanced and reset, in particular for the USA. So we're currently working on a project, and I'll talk about that in a couple of slides, about how we go forward into the USA and how we take and build messages that really resonates with the US trade and also the US consumer. We've also got campaigns such as Aussie Wine Camp, which if we can't get distributors or trade or retailers or influencers to come down to Australia, then we will take that to the US. We will set up a camp in the US and actually drive key messages back into them on their own environment, in their own timelines, because we know it's so difficult to get people here. Education will ramp up significantly. Again, tool sets, libraries, content. And there will be some significant activity in the tourism sector, working with our key partner, TA. But at the end of the day, all of it has to integrate, and it's all about our key messages, talking across all of our events the same way, education the same way, in our digital platforms the same way, how we integrate visits around our key messages, how we use social, which Monica very eloquently spoke about. It's how we can actually drive more engagement through WeChat, Weibo, and really drive premium Australian messages. Finally, there's media partnerships, which will become a significant part of what we do for the next 3 years. And then finally, advertising. But we've already invested some of the $11 million over the last couple of months. One of the first activities we did, which was very much in the test phase, was to take 16 wineries into San Francisco and ultimately New York under the Artisans of Australian Wine. We undertook a whole series of media and VIP events. We undertook Shiraz benchmark tasting, which was undertaken blind. We had 40 key influencers in a room in New York, and we went through the nuances of Australian Shiraz. Unbeknown to them, there was other countries' Shiraz in that mix, and it was discussed and debated at the same time. But what was also exciting was that it coincided with other activities in the market. So it wasn't just 16 winemakers in town. There were many other winemakers there for the Martin Scott trade tasting. And some of you in the room here today were there. It is all about getting more foot traffic into market. Now, this was a test scenario, and we want to replicate this going forward, but we need more people to come on this journey with us. We also undertook a consumer VIP blogger tasting as part of that activity in New York, in Brooklyn, where we worked with an Australian-focused media company, and we were able to get 400 to 500 consumers, bloggers, VIPs in Brooklyn to actually taste Australian wine with Australian food. So we're trying to connect that whole piece of the missing puzzle where there's no conception of what Australian food and wine is in market. Now, there is a short video that we will jump to just to show you an essence of what happened that night.
Tonight we're in Williamsburg working with convicts to put on an event called Taste of Australia. The 30 wineries showcasing their wines from all these different regions around Australia. It's awesome. We've got Riesling, Chardonnay, you name it. Pairing up with the food from 5 Aussie chefs in New York City to really exploring the best that Australia does, really how it pairs with a bunch of different wines.
Stepping up our presence. Certainly our China Wine Awards has been going for 5 years. 2-3 years ago, it was a simple cocktail party. This year, we've turned it into a much more significant activity in Shanghai. We had an expo on the day. 500 Chinese trade attended that. We ran 4 key masterclasses that particular day with James Halliday in the market, Fongy Walker running them. James March was there doing his Barossa gig. We had 250 attendees at our gala awards dinner that night, where we recognized 14 key trade specialists. But it is all about recognizing the Chinese market. It is our most valuable market at the moment, And these sort of activities are all about recognizing how important it is and building partnerships, relationships, building friendship. And this is the sort of activity that in the past we've looked at our competition and said we need to do that. For the first time, we've actually had the funding to be able to do it and deliver it and do it in a scale that is appropriate to the size of the Chinese market. Next day, we actually had a lunch for 70 key media. So it is not just one single activity, but it's a series of individual programs or campaigns that lead to a much bigger presence and a much bigger recognition of how important this is to the Australian wine industry. For the wineries that we had in Shanghai, we then took them down into Hong Kong, where the Hong Kong Wine and Dine ran just over 10 days ago. Now, Hong Kong is a critical piece in defending, or Hong Kong is incredibly critical to us in defending that part of the market. All the wineries that were in Shanghai came down to Hong Kong. We had 30 wineries in Hong Kong in total, and we had 144,000 consumers come through an event over 4 days. Now, not all those tasted Australian wines, but the first time we had a significant presence on the ground where you could taste Australian wine. We had multiple regions represented. McLaren were there, the Barossa was there, Margaret River was there, Clare Valley was there, Coonawarra was there. It was significant. And again, it really provides a vehicle for us to, A, talk to the consumer, which is incredibly important for us, but it also allows us to defend and also support our key retail and our key importers in that particular market. In addition, we ran key media events as well. So it's not a single standalone isolated activity, but it is part of an integrated campaign. And a lot of this is about consistency, keeping that message going, reinforcing the fact that Australia is all about premium wine. We're not there to pour cheap wines. Every consumer there wanted to buy the most expensive wine they could. Ongoing, we are investing in a much more significant way to really drive that gatekeeper engagement through media. Because we want to talk to, in the first instance, the gatekeepers that are holding us back, the distributors, the retailers, the importers, and we are investing significantly over the next 3 years in the Wine Spectator, in Enthusiast, and in digital to get through to, A, the trade, but also eventually to the consumer. And that will go through many different phases over the next 3 years. The first phase is the engagement with the key influencers, and that is through these type of publications. So you will see, and you have been seeing through the levy funds over the last 12 months, an increase in activity that has been talking about regionality. It is talking about innovation, excitement. It is linking it back to food from an Australian perspective. This will ramp up. This is not just in traditional print, this is in digital as well. And it is an exciting opportunity for the individual regions to get involved in this particular sort of awareness build, engagement. We are also investing heavily in New York Vinexpo in March 2018. Vinexpo are going back to New York for the first time in 10 years. Again, they retreated from that space. We've secured 100 plus square meters, so it is a test, but it means that we will be the largest country exhibitor there. We are aiming to showcase 50 plus wineries who are already active in the market, so this is really supporting the importers who have been out there for the last decade. And it is about pulling as many key influencers into New York in that time period as we can. Again, trying to get those influencers, the gatekeepers, the importers, the distributors, the retailers, to understand that Australia is back, we are investing again. We're tying this into a Wine Spectator 90 plus tasting bar, so it just reinforces key retail messages. There will be masterclasses over those 2 days as well to showcase variety and also to showcase regional messaging. But it also allows us to use that as an anchor event to put on additional activities in New York in that time period. Where again, we can talk to retailer, we can talk to distributor, we can talk to consumer. May 2018, as I mentioned, Vinexpo. It is a massive exercise for us. At the moment, we're looking at least 130 wineries have put an expression of interest in to be part of that. 7 regions have put their hand up to be part of that. The interest and demand that is coming through at the moment is significant because it means that we can showcase that, again, regionality, we can showcase varietal. We have Grenache as the lead variety in that week, which allows us to, again, push regionality. It is big. We will then take as many of those 130 wineries as we can physically manage and take them into China on a 4-city roadshow. Take them to Shenyang, Jinan, Wuhan, and then end up in Shanghai. So 3 second-tier cities and 1 first-tier city. Now, running underneath that, social media needs to happen, be it through WeChat, Weibo, their activities on Tmall, Alibaba, and how we engage through Alipay and everything else in that particular area. So, again, this is potentially the largest activity Wine Australia has ever undertaken in terms of two particular types of events coming together as one major campaign. And as I mentioned, that digital piece for China is actually incredibly important. How we engage and reset our Tmall engagement and our investment, how we drive traffic onto the Alibaba platform and Tmall, how we build that premium messaging for Australian wine in China. And we're currently working through a project to supercharge and move that forward very quickly, especially in the Weibo and WeChat areas. And again, that's why Andrew and Monica were here today, because we're working with them on that particular project. But it's not just about that, it's also about how we engage and set up Alipay, because the Chinese consumer uses that as a vehicle to pay. But it does mean that there is a significant investment that needs to happen in digital content, how we use videos, how we use our education packages. Everything is interrelated. Now, that is just a very high-level version of what we are doing. There's a lot more campaigns in the pipeline, but what we're trying to do is not do lots of small activities. These are big campaigns. These are significant investments over the next 3 years. This is just the next 6 months. So there will be a lot more detail that will come through the website over the next few months, and there will be a lot more engagement that I do through our marketing advisory group and back into the regions to keep you updated. So, thank you.
So I'm going to finish off and run you through. It's relatively dry, but I think you'll have a keen interest in this aspect around the various grant schemes that have been put forward as part of the 50 mil package. So I'm not going to run through every single detail on every single slide. There's draft guidelines that are available through our website, and you can read these in detail because there is a lot of detail that sits there. But I just want to socialise and make sure you understand the opportunities that are coming through under these various grants, because they are new and you need to understand what's on offer. So to be very clear, under the package there are 3 grants. The first is this wine export grant, and this is the one that individual enterprises can tap into. It's relatively small in the overall funding quantum. It's only $1 million. The simple idea behind this is kicking off 1 January will provide an opportunity similar in the way, I'm not saying it absolutely mirrors it, but similar way to the EMDG, which many of you would be familiar with, provides an opportunity for reimbursement of various export promotion expenses that you incur from 1 January onwards. As I said, it's $1 million. It's going to be on a first come, first served basis. So when the money runs out, the money runs out. We'll run a daily tracker on our website so people understand where things sit, and so you understand how much money is left in the kitty. There's going to be eligibility criteria in terms of who can tap into it. I must emphasise these are draft guidelines at the moment, which have been out for consultation. It falls ultimately to the Minister to come up with a final landing where these guidelines sit, and they will be released once they complete the various processes they need to undertake in Canberra. We're expecting a release in early December or thereabouts, but that's not our decision. Obviously, we've got to wait to what happens out of Canberra. So I emphasise these are draft guidelines. There's some eligibility criteria that are up there on the screen. It's capped at this stage around where your turnover sits. So if you're less than $20 million, you'll be eligible in terms of being accessed to these grants. And it's focused on activity in China, Hong Kong, Macau, and the US. Some of the expenses that can be claimed, some of the, the travel costs of visiting some of these markets, costs of using samples, costs of attending various trade shows, etc., and other marketing and advertising collateral. As I said, jump into the guidelines, look at them, study them in detail, make sure you are familiar with them, so then you can hit the ground running once we roll over into the new year, and you're not left, you're not missing out on the opportunity that sits there, because knowing you all, I think you'll be pretty quick on this one, and you'll take up this opportunity, and that's what it's there for. So turning now to this a $10 million pool, which is split in two, and $5 million has been allocated so-called state grants. They're very much focused on tourism. Going back a step, the opportunity around the package was supporting export marketing, supporting tourism, acknowledging some regions in the country are very focused on export, some are much more focused on the tourism opportunity. And the package wants to speak to both of those objectives and deliver funding that helps assist all of that. So there's, out of the $5 million, there's been set allocations for 4 states of $1 million, obviously New South Wales, South Australia, Victoria and WA, and $500,000 for Queensland and Tasmania. The state wine associations are the lead proponent here, taking the lead in terms of pulling together the projects that they want to take forward with this funding envelope that's been presented to them. So work within your relevant state association to make sure you're having a say and you're engaged with them in terms of having that conversation with them as to what opportunities come forward under this funding opportunity. There's going to be cash co-contribution supply. Again, there's indications of where that sits in the draft guidelines, but wait and see where it finally lands with the guidelines that are issued from the Minister in early December, as I said. In terms of the assessment process, we're going to establish an independent expert assessment panel to sit across all of this. We're conscious very much of our skill set, and we've got to stick to our knitting. We don't necessarily have this expertise on what qualifies as a quality tourism project, which is the key focus through these activities. So we're setting up a group of people, there'll be 5 sitting on this panel, who really will act as the value add. They will work and provide input into the process. Ultimately, we want people to succeed through this. So they'll be set up to work with the applicants, provide feedback, and then ultimately assess the projects that should go forward for recommendation. With these state grants, the ultimate decision maker will be the Minister, so the panel will review those applications and then put them forward for recommendation to the Minister for the ultimate decision. There's another $5 million pool which sits in a competitive space. So this will be open, but it won't be open for individual enterprises. It's to encourage regional collaboration, consortia coming together with projects that meet, again, those tourism objectives, but also wine export marketing, provided there's a tourism link, it can be part of that mix as well. There's various scales of grants that will be available in terms of funding. And again, there's a whole number of detail in the guidelines in terms of who's eligible, in terms of the applicants, and the type of activities that can be put forward. So study them in depth. The expert assessment panel will sit across these applications as well, but the ultimate decision will come to me as CEO of Wine Australia, but we'll obviously be relying very heavily on the authoritative advice that comes through that expert assessment panel. So that wraps up. It's pretty short and sweet, but I just want to sensitise you all to the opportunity. I'm not jumping into any of all the details here, but wraps up the 3 grant opportunities that sit under the package. I just want to wrap up or conclude. There is, just to confuse matters a little bit more, there is another grant scheme out there. It's called the Wine Tourism and Cellar Door Grant Scheme. This is quite separate to the package. This is all closely linked to the wet rebate reforms. You'll all be acutely aware, I'm sure, of the decision regarding the reforming the wet rebate, changing the eligibility criteria in terms of moving it to packaged product. Also, the cap is being reduced from $500,000 to $350,000. Associated with that, though, there was a decision by the government to allow an additional grant scheme, which in essence potentially allows those who would be moving back down to that 350 cap, potentially allows them to access an additional $100,000. So in a best case scenario, can get back up to 450 overall. So they'd only be $50,000 worse off compared to the previous regime, in essence. So that's a very summary, sort of crude summary of what it's all about. It's important to understand it's being shifted from the tax system. So the 350 rebate cap will stick within your normal parameters in terms of working through your BAS statements, etc. This is a grant scheme that we've been asked to administer on behalf of the government. It's going to be looking back in arrears, so it's not going to be during the course of that financial year. It will be the following financial year, it will kick in, and then it'll be looking backwards, and then if there's people that are eligible, they're able to get access to this grant. Key points to know: you need to hit that 350 cap, so you need to meet those necessary sales of that are eligible wet rebatable sales. Then over and above that, you've paid wet on those cellar door sales. It can be both physical and online cellar door, so it's essentially direct to consumer sales, but it needs to be at least 50% from a physical cellar door. So you really want to tie it back to having a physical cellar door. And again, there's definitions of what constitutes a physical cellar door, so study the guidelines in detail to make sure you qualify. So once you hit all those hurdles, you'll be able to claim for the wet that you've paid on those additional cellar door sales, and they'll be reimbursed or paid back through this grant scheme that we will administer. One caveat on it all is there's a cap of $10 million. So clearly, if there's more applicants, over 100 applicants, each claiming the $100,000, it will be reduced proportionally on a cents in the dollar basis. Again, a little bit similar to how the EMDG sometimes work in a year that it's oversubscribed. So it's a potential up to $100,000, but there's no guarantees whilst we're working within a $10 million cap. I'll leave it there. I just want to make sure everyone's aware of all of this that's happening. Plenty of detail. So ultimately, encourage you, stay in touch. If you're not subscribing to our newsletters, self-interest will drive the day, I think. Always back that horse. So please jump on board and have a look and make sure you're across all the communications that will be coming out around the package, but also everything else that we've been asked to administer, because there's plenty that's happening. It's a period of great change, it's exciting change, but we want to make sure that you're across all the opportunities that sit out there for you. So I'll wrap up there, but thanks for your time.
Stuart, just wondering, with the large number of Chinese students studying in Australia, is there a specific strategy aimed at engaging those people who can potentially be future ambassadors for the Australian wine industry?
In terms of a specific strategy, we're still developing it. The critical one is, yes, they're here. We know there's a lot of Chinese students here. What I did mention, though, is our strategy in Weibo and WeChat is developing, and that's going to develop very rapidly over the next few months. Now, in that piece, that's where we want to try and engage with those Chinese students. Now, there's other phases of it where we could actually engage directly with the universities, University of Adelaide, South Australia, where we know there's a high concentration. So it is still work in progress. We've got a lot of projects on. There's a lot of things we want to do. We're still a relatively small team, so we're trying to focus where we can on the bigger pieces, but it is an important one. We've always talked about having an alumni. We've always talked about developing education in a broader way in China, especially through that alumni mechanism and rewarding those alumni mechanisms where we have them in place. So it is coming.
Thanks, Stu and Andreas. Stu, you mentioned about the PR and media program that you are, over here, mate, yep, that you are going to be focusing quite a bit of money into.
Yep.
and you mentioned the key messages that you're taking to those influencers. What are those key messages, and is it under the banner of the history, evolution, revolution, or have we changed away from that? And if so, we should all probably know them so that we can be all singing from the same hymn sheet when we're out in trade?
Yeah. History, evolution, revolution is really, it's almost like a campaign. It's not necessarily key messages, but it does form part of what we do have in place at the moment. Some of those messages, we have about 8 key messages at the moment. Creativity, authenticity, innovation, they're just some of those. But what we want to try and do, especially for the US market, and it also means for China as well, is to bring those down to maybe 3, maybe 4, where they can align much more from small, medium to large. At the moment, they've always been very much more around the small to medium. So that large piece has sort of been left out of the mix to a certain degree. Now, if you take the small, medium, large that are actually all investing in the US market, there is a significant amount of money that's being currently spent in terms of global marketing. Now, that's where we want to align our key messages against the entire industry and that sort of equity of access piece. So that key message program at the moment, we're working through that. We're currently going into an RFP process in about December, January, and we're currently looking for agencies to work with to help us develop those or nuance those messages so we can then present them back to industry so we get this broad element of alignment and everyone can sing off the same hymn sheet. Because at the moment we've got some great messages, we've got too many. We need to really nuance those down.
Please put your hand together for Stuart and Andreas. Thanks very much, guys.